Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I thought we'd talk a little bit about these things. They're called extension tubes, and they're one of the cheaper ways of getting into macro photography, because you probably already have a camera and you have a lens, so you can pick up a set of these rather cheap, and then you should be more or less good to go for macro photography. And they're very simple. I mean, when we unhook one of these here, you can see, take off the back as well, they're just a ring, and there's no glass, no nothing. All they do is they move the lens, which would be on this side, further away from the sensor, which would be on that side. So the more of these that you stack together, the further from the sensor your lens will be. And the properties of this means that you now need to focus quite closer, and it allows your lens to focus quite closer. So I've already set up the camera here with, this is an adapter because this is a newer camera, but here is the extension tube and here is the lens. And this is purely a 50mm lens and an extension tube. And this is actually how I started doing macro photography. These are my old extension tubes, and I bought them used from a local camera store, and they've served me really well. So this is kind of a little bit back to basics for me, and yeah, it should be good fun to use this equipment again. But let me show you how an extension tube actually works in camera. So come to this fruit tree here because it's obviously flowering and it's really gorgeous. We also had a bit of rain overnight, so this has left some droplets around. And right now I've only got the 50mm on, so let me go in camera and we'll see how close we can get. And actually we can get pretty close, but as you can see, then about here is where it's sharpest. So I'm going to take a couple of pictures here. The first thing we notice when we put on the extension tube is that it no longer manages to focus in the distance. So let's do the exact same plant and see where we go. And as you can see, I have to go quite a bit closer to get it to focus, but look at that. As you can see now, we're mostly very close up. Now this gives us some opportunities, but there's also one minor drawback to this, and that is our depth of field is now extremely shallow. So we lose some of the background. So we've got to be really careful to make sure that the things in focus are the ones we want in focus. And sometimes you may need to use a tripod to focus bracket. You can do handheld focus bracketing, but it's a very difficult technique, and I think anyone starting out with macro certainly should not go for handheld focus stacking to begin with. Try and find subjects that work with the depth of field that you have when you put on the extension tube. Now, as I mentioned, because it was raining yesterday, there is a plethora of wonderful little subjects in this tree. So I'm going to see if I can't find a few more. what you'll quickly notice with the extension tubes is that the bigger the extension tube, the narrower your depth of field will be. And sometimes the middle one that I had on earlier might be too much. So I've changed now to the thinnest one, and the difference is that now I have to be a bit further away, but it also gives me a greater depth of field when the subjects are not on the same plane, because that's when you get the issue with depth of field. Is if everything is on the same plane, everything will be sharp, but if some things are in front and some things are in back and stuff like that, it's very difficult to work out what you should put in front to get a good composition. And that's where the thinner one might come in handy. So let's have a look at how close we can focus now. So if I go in camera, and around here is where things are starting to... Can it focus there? No, but it can focus here. Right, so that I think is enough with this particular tree, as lovely it is to walk around and see the flowers and whatnot. We'll go around and see if we can find some other subjects to use the extension tubes on, and then after that we'll do a little wrap up. So what we have here is a log, fallen stump of a tree, and it's got some amazing patterns and colours. Now if we were to shoot this with a regular lens, you might get some detail, but if we shoot it with some sort of macro and get really close in on the patterns, I think that can make for some beautiful pictures. So that's what I'm going to do. Now I am going to move some of this grass, dead grass, away, because it's untidy in my little scene. So let's see what we can do here. Well, that's not too bad, but because I still have the thin ring on, it sort of leaves a little bit to be desired. I'll put the picture on now, and just so you can see. Then I'm going to change to a thicker ring to try and get closer. So as you can see from the picture I'm putting on now, we're getting a lot closer by changing to a different extension tube, but our depth of field gets quite narrow as well. So we need to hit that balance between getting close enough and the depth of field, because it won't look very good unless you focus stack when you lose the depth of field. So, and people like their pictures to be sharp naturally. Do you know that nettles had flowers? I did, because I've obviously looked at them before, but here are some nettle flowers, and whilst they're kind of tricky to photograph, they can make some pretty decent subjects. So I'm going to see what I can get around here. Obviously you can't be too particularly worried about getting stung by nettles. Some of them we also have the top with new seeds coming, so let's see if I can try and get that. So, are extension tubes any good? Yes, of course they are. They're really good fun, and this has sort of brought back some memories, because as I mentioned earlier, this is how I started with macro photography, with this particular lens, the 50mm 1.8, and I got some used extension tubes, which are these very ones, and I went out and had some fun. It was closer to midsummer then, so you had lots of bees and other insects around, and I was laying around in the local parks in front of flowers, taking shots of bumblebees collecting pollen and everything else. So yeah, they're good fun, and if you're on a budget and you can pick up extension tube for any camera, and because they don't contain any glass, you should not worry about getting third-party ones. So it's a really cheap way of starting with macro. Now, I know the purist will say this isn't true macro, and that is correct, but I don't care. You get close-up photography with extension tubes, and they work, and you can get some absolutely cracking images if you really work with this. Are they as good as a macro lens? No, they're not. A macro lens is more flexible, as I was showing you in one of the cutscenes. The focus is very limited to an area like this, and your depth of field is really tiny. Now, the depth of field will be really tiny on a macro lens as well, but your focus area is from really close to way over there on a macro lens. Alright, I think that about sums it up. One final thing. In macro photography, you need to take a lot of pictures, and everybody gets hundreds of unsharp pictures. It's just part and parcel of the fact that the field of depth is so narrow, and you invariably have handshake, and you move a little bit back and forth. But as time goes on, don't get frustrated. You will get sharp shots, and they will delight you, and hopefully they'll foster your creativity. So that's it for this little film. If you like this kind of content, please hit that like button. If you want to subscribe to the channel, that'd be fantastic too. And if you have any comments on what you want me to cover, then please leave them below.